the Trump administration just got absolutely spanked in federal court. And I mean, hey.
Sexual anarchy.
Federal Judge John McConnell Jr. just ordered the Trump administration to fully fund SNAP benefits. That is the food stamp program, of course, for 42 million Americans. Not to partially fund them, but not negotiate about funding them, but to fully fund them. And what did the Trump Department of Justice do? They immediately appealed and asked for an emergency stay because apparently feeding 42 million hungry Americans is too much to ask. But I want to talk about what happens when the courts actually do their job and put a check on executive power, because that's what this looks like. All right. So let me give you the details of how this all went down. All right. So SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, again, food stamps, serves about 42 million Americans, as I mentioned. We're talking about working families, elderly folks, disabled people, kids, people who need help putting food on their table because they're not getting paid enough. The program was running low on funding, which happens. I mean, especially during economic uncertainty and, more people needing assistance. You're going to run out of money, right? Now, that said, there was an emergency fund. There is an emergency fund that was made specifically for situations like this. But here's what the Trump administration did. They decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to fund only about 65% of all SNAP benefits. And say, we don't actually have the authority to use all the funds. Wait, you're taking authority in every other place except for this? Weird. So, in essence, they told 42 million people, sorry, we're not going to pay out full benefits. We'll give you a little bit. Oh, okay. But the judge said, no, you're going to use that full emergency contingency fund. You're going to fund SNAP at 100%, not 65%, and you're going to do it now, not later. So now Judge McConnell looked at the Trump administration's argument that they could only do that partial funding and said, no, that's BS. You're going to fund it fully because that is what the contingency fund is for. It is for emergencies, and right now there is an emergency. Let me just note that it's totally on brand for this administration to try to shortchange food assistance and then act surprised when a judge tells them, you got to follow the law. Now, you think the Trump administration, if it were a normal administration, they'd be like, okay, fair enough. That would be too reasonable, though. Which is why that's not what happened. Again, they immediately went to the courts, they appealed, same day, and asked for emergency stay, right? And so they're asking a higher court to stop them from having to fully fund food stamps while they fight about whether or not they should have to fully fund food stamps. So think about that. They are so committed to not feeding millions of Americans that they're filing emergency appeals to avoid having to do it. Now, and they're using this argument that the judge overstepped his authority, right? And violated the separation of powers by ordering the executive branch to spend these emergency funds. That doesn't make sense. Oh, yes, the separation of powers. Really, that's their concern. Not the 42 million people who need food. Not the families trying to figure out how to feed their kids on 65% of what they're supposed to get, which they don't get a lot. Okay? Not the elderly folks on fixed incomes trying to stretch their grocery budget. No, what really apparently matters is making sure the judges can't tell this administration, can't tell Trump to use those emergency funds during an emergency. Priorities, folks. This administration sure has them. And here's the thing. This is happening while they're holding ACA subsidies hostage in this government shutdown fight, while they're trying to give themselves unlimited war powers for Venezuela, while they're cutting every single social program they can get their grubby little hands on. Okay? But sure, yeah, let's pretend this is all about separation of powers, right? And not about their commitment of making life harder and more miserable for working people. 42 million Americans. That's how many people rely on the SNAP program. Not an abstract number, okay? This is a single mom, working two part-time jobs that don't offer any benefits, right? How about the 70-year-old veteran on a fixed income that's trying to make his Social Security stretch, right? The disabled worker can't work full-time. Still got to eat, though. the family where both parents are working, but because minimum wage is so low and the cost of living so high, doesn't cover rent and food. Those are the people that rely on this program. Not undocumented immigrants. That's a lie, okay? There are no illegals taking SNAP benefits. And it's not even that much money per person. $200. That's how much you get per person per month. Let me tell you what. Personally, my wife and I spend more than that a month on food right now. And it's because of how expensive everything has gotten since COVID. And so there you are. Now imagine only getting 65% of that, about $130 per person per month. For a family of four, $280 a month in food they cannot afford to buy now. And you wonder why food pantries and food banks are being overwhelmed. This is not tighten your belt money, all right? I mean, a lot of people who are poor and rely on these programs don't even have belts. Be honest. This is now, gee, which of the bills can I get away with not paying so that I can eat? And the Trump administration looked at that situation and said, yeah, you know what, we're good with that. 35% less food assistance looks fine to me. Thankfully, there was a federal judge that said, actually, that is not fine. Fund the goddamn program. Just fund it already. Now, here's what's interesting. Again, after the judge's ruling, you had states that decided, like, for example, California, that were like, we're going to issue the full benefits. They looked at court order and said, yes, we are going to fund this properly. But the Trump DOJ is still fighting it. And they're telling states, do not comply with this order while they appeal. So you have this insane situation where you have states, some states that have stepped up to feed people properly. And then you have other states that are waiting to see what happens with the Trump appeal. And the Trump administration is out there actively trying to stop other states from feeding people the amount that the judge had ordered, which is the full benefits. This is what your small government looks like in practice. The government fighting in court for the right to give you less in food assistance during an emergency. And speaking of separation of powers, right? Getting back to that argument, I want to talk about that. It's important to note why that is complete and utter crap. Okay? The judge can't order the executive branch to spend money. That violates the separation of powers, they say. Only Congress can appropriate funds, and the executive decides how to spend it. Funny, you know, that's the argument that they're making when they're also proponents of impoundment. Okay? Obviously, there's a big problem with their argument, okay, other than the hypocrisy angle. And that problem is the fact that Congress had already appropriated the emergency contingency fund. That exists, the money's there. It's specifically created for emergencies. That's why it's an emergency fund. The judge is not telling them to spend money that is not there, that doesn't exist, that wasn't appropriated. He said, use the money that's already there, the emergency fund for an emergency. That's it. So the Trump administration's argument is, yes, Congress gave us emergency money for food assistance emergencies, and yes, we're in a food assistance emergency. But, you know, we should get to decide whether we actually use that money for an emergency, the emergency money. That's not separation of powers, okay? That's the executive branch ignoring the law and crying about judicial overreach when they get caught. I mean, you can't just not use funds that Congress appropriates for a specific purpose and then claim that the separation of powers when a judge tells you to do that thing, to do your job. And we have seen this before, okay? Every time a court tells this administration that they can't do something illegal, they call it judicial activism. Every time a judge orders them to follow the law, it's overreach. But when they ignore the law, when they refuse to spend appropriated funds, when they try to cut programs without congressional approval, they just claim, oh, it's executive authority. Which, by the way, Project 2025 called to massively expand. Okay, so to them, it is rules for thee, but not for me. Okay? But here's what's really happening and why this court case matters just beyond SNAP benefits, which is really important. But this administration is basically trying to test how much they can get away with. They are pushing the boundaries, right? On, for example, refusing to spend appropriated funds, SNAP, holding healthcare hostage in their shutdown fights, the ACA subsidies, claiming unlimited war powers in Venezuela, ignoring court orders, this case if they succeed on their appeal. Each of these is a test. If they can refuse to fully fund SNAP and get away with it, what else can they refuse to fund? Anything? Anything they don't like. Again, they're already trying. If they can ignore a federal judge's order on SNAP, what other court orders can they ignore? And so far, they've already ignored about 35% of all court orders against them. But this is why Judge McConnell's ruling matters. The law in this case, the law here clearly says that you've got to feed the people, right? You've got to use that emergency fund. It's an emergency. You can't just decide that 42 million Americans get 35% less food assistance because you feel like it. This is what checks and balances look like when they actually work. A judge is doing his job and telling the executive branch that they have to do their job. And the Trump administration's response, fight it, appeal it, try to stop it. Because feeding people is apparently less important than winning a legal argument about the separation of powers. So where do we go from here? Or where does this go from here? Well, the Trump DOJ has already appealed to a higher court, and that court will decide whether or not to let that order go, where SNAP gets fully funded, grant the stay, so it's back to 65% of all funding while they fight, or fast track an appeal, where you get a decision that comes quickly. Look, here's what you need to know. All right, if you're on SNAP, you should check with your state to see if they're following the judge's order or if they're waiting for that appeal. Again, as I mentioned, some of the states are already issuing their full amount, like California. But if you're not on SNAP, and if you know people that are, though, make sure that they are aware of this. Because the Trump administration isn't going to advertise that a judge ordered them to fully pay their benefits. But overall, this is a rare win. A judge is checking executive power and enforcing the law and making sure that 42 million people get the food assistance that they're entitled to. But it's also a reminder of who and what we're dealing with. An administration that is so ideologically opposed to helping working people that they would fight in court for the right to give you less food during a food emergency. And again, they're appealing, they're fighting it, they're claiming a judicial overreach and the separation of powers. They're throwing all sorts of legal arguments at the wall to see what sticks. And so far, nothing has. Because right now, today, a federal judge told them, feed the damn people. And I think that in itself is worthy of acknowledging. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, you can become a member on our YouTube page, you can become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.